In a forgotten quarter of an old city, where history seeped from the very cobblestones and the air always carried a whisper of secrets, Mara found herself inexplicably drawn to an antique wine cabinet at a dusty estate sale. It was an oddity even among relics, an imposing dark wood piece adorned with intricate carvings and faded Hebrew inscriptions that seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm. Despite its grim appearance, the cabinet beckoned her as if it were a long-lost part of her own soul. Without fully understanding why, Mara purchased the cabinet, oblivious to the curse that clung to its every fiber. The journey home was shrouded in a heavy, uneasy silence. As Mara carried the cabinet into her modest apartment on the top floor of a creaking building, the wind outside carried a mournful sigh, and the twilight thickened into an oppressive darkness. That very night, as she lay in bed, a low murmur rose from the shadows, a susurrus of voices in a language long dead, murmuring unintelligible prayers that sent shivers down her spine. She dismissed them as tricks of her weary mind, yet a latent sense of foreboding clung to her throughout the night. As days passed, the strange occurrences grew bolder. The once inert cabinet now seemed to exude an eerie luminescence. In the dead hours before dawn, Mara would awaken to find the cabinet's doors slightly ajar, as if something had tried to escape. At times, she glimpsed fleeting shadows dancing along the walls, moving with a purpose that belied the randomness of their form. An oppressive dread settled in her heart, and the whispers grew louder, at times a cacophony of sorrow, at others a sinister chant echoing in the hollow recesses of her mind. Troubled by recurring nightmares, Mara began to record her experiences. Each night, visions of a gaunt, anguished figure tormented her sleep, a man whose eyes bore witness to unending misery, trapped behind the carved panels of the cabinet. In these dreams, he reached out with trembling hands, silently pleading for release. On waking, the vivid images haunted her every thought, and inexplicable bruises began to mark her skin in patterns resembling ancient symbols. The pain was not physical alone, it gnawed at her sanity, blurring the line between nightmare and waking terror. Compelled by desperation, Mara delved into the cabinet's mysterious past. Late evenings were spent poring over brittle yellowed books at the local library and combing through archives of forgotten newspapers. Hidden in the margin of an obscure journal, she discovered an account of a tragic family from Eastern Europe. The tale spoke of a desperate ritual performed during a time of persecution, a ritual intended to invoke a benevolent guardian spirit. Instead, something went horribly wrong. The family, in their sorrow and desperation, inadvertently unleashed a Dybbuk, a malevolent, tormented spirit rooted in ancient Jewish folklore, condemned to wander the earthly realm in search of an unsuspecting host. The writings detailed that the cabinet had once been the repository of this cursed entity, sealed away by a failed exorcism that had only deepened its rage. Among the scribbled warnings, a single desperate note stood out: "Beware the box that holds the soul, for it craves the living as much as the dead." The more Mara learned, the more the supernatural phenomena escalated. The cabinet began to exert a magnetic pull on her thoughts. At night, its presence seemed to seep into every corner of her apartment. Objects would shift inexplicably, a book falling off a shelf, a mirror tilting just so, a lamp flickering in a rhythm that mimicked the stuttering heartbeat of terror. The whispers turned to direct, chilling statements, half-heard promises of eternal torment and demands that the living hand over their life force to sate a hunger that could never be quenched. Mara's attempts to rid herself of the cursed relic proved futile. Every time she tried to move the cabinet, an overwhelming force pinned her to the spot, as if the Dybbuk itself was defending its prison. She sought help from various sources: a local historian well-versed in occult lore, a renowned psychic known for channeling spirits, and even an aging rabbi reputed for his knowledge of ancient rites. Each encounter only deepened her despair. The historian, upon seeing the cabinet, whispered that it was a container of ancient sorrow, a relic from a past marred by ritualistic failure and untold anguish. The psychic, with trembling eyes, insisted that the spirit within was not merely malevolent but insatiably hungry, feeding on fear and life itself. The rabbi, when he finally mustered the courage to perform a tentative exorcism in the dim light of Mara's living room, began reciting ancient prayers with a quivering voice. His incantations faltered as he saw the spectral faces emerging from the cabinet's dark recesses, a gaunt crowd of lost souls, their eyes filled with both agony and malice. He warned Mara that breaking the curse might demand a sacrifice too terrible to fathom, a surrender of a part of one's very essence, possibly even one's life. Torn between the desire for liberation and the dread of the unknown cost, Mara's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her nights became battlegrounds of terror, and her days were marked by an ever-deepening fatigue that blurred the line between sleep and wakefulness. The once vibrant colors of her world faded into a bleak, monochrome nightmare. In moments of rare clarity, she scribbled frantic notes and desperate pleas in a diary that now lay in tatters, its pages stained with tears and the residue of restless nights. One particularly harrowing evening, as storm clouds loomed like specters outside, Mara resolved to take one final desperate step. With trembling hands, she prepared a makeshift altar, gathering relics of protection. A Star of David pendant, ancient scrolls of prayer, and a vial of blessed water. With every ounce of courage, she chanted the incantations the rabbi had taught her. The air around the cabinet crackled with a malevolent energy, and for a moment, the oppressive silence was shattered by a guttural wail that seemed to emanate from the depths of the cabinet itself. The carved wood trembled as if in agony, and the spectral figure from her nightmares loomed larger, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. In that terrible crescendo, Mara felt a searing pain, as though icy claws were rending her soul apart. As the ritual reached its fevered peak, the cabinet's door swung wide open, releasing a gust of frigid air that extinguished the small flame of hope she had kindled. In the darkness that followed, Mara felt the presence of the Dybbuk envelop her, a suffocating, all-consuming force that whispered in a chorus of voices, each echoing the lament of centuries. In that final moment, she understood the terrible truth. The entity was not merely confined within the cabinet, it was a living, unyielding hunger that fed on her very essence, a curse that could not be undone without paying an unthinkable price. When the dawn finally broke, the apartment was eerily silent. The makeshift altar lay in ruins, and Mara was nowhere to be found, only scattered remnants of her desperate struggle remained. The antique wine cabinet stood alone in the center of the room, its surface now bearing a dark, unexplainable patina. A lingering chill filled the space, as though the spirit's presence had seeped into every fiber of the building. Neighbors later recounted strange occurrences, a faint whisper in the hallways, shadows that danced on walls at odd hours, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to cling to the air. Some even claimed that on stormy nights, they could see a solitary figure pacing in the dim light near the building's entrance, a ghostly reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within. Though Mara's fate remained shrouded in mystery, one truth was undeniable. The Dybbuk's hunger was insatiable, and its malevolent influence lingered long after the ritual's failure. The cursed cabinet, a silent witness to an ancient and tragic miscalculation, continued to stand, a dark relic harboring a spirit that defied containment. Its presence was a perpetual threat, a haunting promise that the ancient curse could one day claim a new, unsuspecting host. And so, in the quiet corners of that time-worn building and beyond, the legend of the haunted wine cabinet persisted, a chilling reminder that some relics of the past are best left undisturbed, for their dark secrets are bound by curses that transcend the boundaries of time and sanity. Brace yourself, because the next story is even more disturbing. Detective-turned-investigative journalist Arden Miles had always been drawn to cold cases, but none haunted her nights quite like the unsolved Keddie Cabin Murders of 1981. The callous cruelty and unexplained nature of that fateful winter had seeped into local legend, a specter that whispered through decades. Now, decades later, Arden found herself standing before Cabin 28, a dilapidated structure, half consumed by creeping ivy and the relentless passage of time, its weathered boards groaning under the weight of secrets best left undisturbed. A thick fog clung to the forest floor as Arden pushed open the creaking door, the sound echoing like a ghostly warning. The cabin's interior was a grim time capsule. Yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle police reports, and scattered personal belongings lay strewn about in disarray. A shattered picture frame, its glass splintered like shards of broken dreams, rested near an overturned chair. Every relic told a tale of horror, the remnants of lives abruptly shattered on that night, when innocence was brutally defiled by an unknown terror. Arden's flashlight beam danced erratically across the peeling wallpaper and decaying floorboards, each step stirring up a fine layer of dust and memories. In one corner of the room, a diary lay open on a rotted desk, its pages filled with frantic, nearly illegible scribbles. She leaned in, her breath hitching as she read the trembling lines. The night was thick with silence. We heard a sound, a shuffle, a whisper like something slithering through the dark. Then came the mask and with it, the end. Her heart pounded in time with the rustling of the trees outside, each creak of the cabin amplifying the sense of an unseen presence. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began to punctuate the heavy silence. Unseen whispers echoed through the empty rooms, a disembodied chorus that murmured indistinct warnings in the dead of night. Shadows moved with a deliberate, unsettling cadence, their forms warping and elongating along the warped walls, as though trying to escape an invisible force. And everywhere, a suffocating presence seemed to coil around Arden, chilling her to the bone. As she gathered more evidence, a tape recording hidden in an old briefcase and a handwritten note left behind on a dust-covered table, Arden began to sense that the cabin itself was a living archive of that dreadful night. The tape, when played on a battered cassette player, emitted a sound that was not quite human. A guttural, inhuman rasp intermingled with the crackle of static, punctuated by an almost imperceptible, distorted plea. One particular segment sent shivers down her spine. In the background, over the hiss of the recording, she could just make out a single desperate word repeated over and over, a word that morphed and shifted with each replay. The handwritten note was equally unnerving. At first glance, it bore a chilling message: the truth is buried with the dead. Yet when Arden returned later in the day, she found that the note had altered its wording, now reading, "The truth should never be unearthed." The ink seemed to flow as if it were still wet, a maddening reminder that something in the cabin was actively rewriting history, or perhaps its own script of horror. During one restless night in the cabin, as Arden attempted to sleep on a makeshift cot amid the debris, vivid flashbacks seized her mind. In these visions, she became a silent witness to that long-ago terror. The flashbacks played out like fragments of a half-remembered nightmare, victims huddled together in terrified confusion, their faces illuminated by the wavering light of a single lantern. A masked intruder, his features obscured by a grotesque, shifting mask, moving silently through the rooms as if on a predatory mission. And then an oppressive silence that fell over the cabin, punctuated only by a final, blood-curdling scream that was swallowed by the void. The more Arden uncovered, the more the line between past and present began to blur. Every artifact, every echo of sound seemed to draw her deeper into a vortex of despair. Her recordings captured disembodied voices calling out in hushed tones, and photographs she took in the dim light later revealed spectral images of individuals who should not have been there, a fleeting glimpse of a woman's anguished eyes behind a shattered mirror, or a child's hand reaching out from behind a crumbling wall. Late one night, compelled by a mix of dread and obsession, Arden ventured into the deepest recesses of Cabin 28. There, in what had once been a family's living room, she discovered a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside lay a bundle of personal letters, meticulously preserved despite the decay around them. The letters told the harrowing story of a family terrorized by an intruder whose methods defied explanation. The words were raw and desperate, speaking of a force that was not entirely human, a dark, malevolent presence that seemed to feed on fear and suffering. One letter ended abruptly, its final words scrawled in trembling script: "He is not alone. The darkness, it lives." In that moment, the temperature in the room plummeted. The whispering grew louder, and the shadows congealed into something that resembled a figure, an almost human shape with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Arden's pulse hammered in her ears as she fumbled with her camera, trying to capture proof of the spectral presence. But the device only recorded static, punctuated by the low, rhythmic sound of labored breathing. For several excruciating minutes, she stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and a morbid compulsion to document every detail. Now completely immersed in the mystery and terror of Cabin 28, Arden was forced to confront an unthinkable possibility. The killer who had once stalked these halls might not have been merely mortal, but something other. An entity that transcended human cruelty, merging with an unspeakable darkness that had taken root in the cabin. Had the unsolved murders been the work of a man, or had they been orchestrated by a force that defied explanation? A force that might still linger in the shadows, feeding on the remnants of fear? With the dawn approaching, Arden made one final, desperate recording. Standing in the center of the room, surrounded by the scattered remnants of a shattered past, she spoke directly into the camera, her voice trembling with a mix of resolve and terror. "I've seen things here that defy explanation. I've uncovered clues that suggest something unholy remains. But I fear that in trying to reveal the truth, I may have awakened something that was meant to be forgotten." As she finished speaking, a sudden gust of frigid wind extinguished the flickering candlelight, plunging the cabin into darkness. The recording ended abruptly. When Arden's colleagues later retrieved the footage, they found only a final eerie moment. A fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure standing behind her, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. No one could say for certain whether Arden had uncovered the truth of what transpired on that fateful night, or if her intrusion had merely stirred a dormant evil, a curse that had slumbered undisturbed for decades. In the end, Cabin 28 remains shrouded in mystery. The echoes of unspeakable violence, the cryptic notes that change their message, and the disembodied voices continue to haunt its empty rooms. And as the legend of the Keddie Cabin Murders endures, one unsettling question remains unanswered. Has the truth been laid bare, or has someone, perhaps something, been set free? The forest keeps its secrets well, and in the lingering silence of Cabin 28, the darkness waits, ever patient, for its next unwitting guest. Mariana Costa had always been drawn to the mysteries of the past. As an investigative journalist known for her relentless pursuit of forgotten truths, she spent countless sleepless nights poring over cold cases. But nothing had ever chilled her to the core quite like the lead masks case of 1966, a baffling tragedy from a small Brazilian town that had, for decades, been dismissed as an unsolvable enigma. When Mariana received an anonymous tip about a hidden police report and a journal written by one of the investigators, she knew she had to revisit the case. Late one humid evening in Sao Paulo, Mariana met with an elderly archivist in a dusty municipal storage facility. Between stacks of yellowed files, the archivist hesitated before pulling out a faded folder stamped with the words "Confidential." Inside, Mariana discovered a battered notebook and a set of handwritten notes that had never made it into the official report. The scribbled entries mentioned the signal and spoke of an unseen presence, a force that transcended the ordinary and defied rational explanation. The notebook's final entry was the most disturbing. They wore the masks not for radiation, but to shield their eyes from the horror beyond. The signal beckons. It must not be seen. Mariana's heart pounded as she left the archives, the cryptic words echoing in her mind. The case, long relegated to local legend, suddenly acquired a sinister depth. That night, as she prepared her equipment for a field investigation, strange phenomena began to manifest. In her apartment, the overhead lights flickered incessantly, and her digital recorder emitted bursts of eerie static that disrupted her own voice. Cryptic symbols, seemingly etched in a language she couldn't decipher, appeared on her bathroom mirror as if written in condensation. The sensation of being watched crept over her, an intangible presence lurking just out of sight. Determined to trace the source of these occurrences, Mariana made her way to the remote hillside where the two men, whose bodies were discovered wearing lead-eye masks, had met their mysterious end. The location, once a quiet hilltop now shrouded by dense foliage and an oppressive silence, resonated with an aura of otherworldly dread. As she climbed the narrow, overgrown path, her recorder captured intermittent whispers, faint voices that murmured in unidentifiable tongues, and the wind seemed to carry distorted phrases. The signal, the signal. On the hill, Mariana found remnants of the past, rusted tools, a partially buried notebook, and fragments of discarded belongings. In a secluded clearing near the edge of a steep drop, she noticed a peculiar arrangement of rocks forming what appeared to be a circle. In the center lay a pair of objects that made her blood run cold, a broken lead mask, its surface marred by time, and something else, as if etched with intricate, sinister patterns. The symbols on the mask were uncannily similar to those she'd seen scrawled in her apartment. That night, as Mariana camped near the hilltop, her dreams were invaded by vivid flashbacks. She saw the two men in their final hours, their eyes darting about in terror, their voices low and frantic as they muttered about the signal and an ever-present watcher. In her vision, the men argued in hushed, desperate tones as they prepared to ascend the hill. Their final moments were a chaotic montage, a masked figure moving silently among them, the oppressive hush before a storm, and then a sudden, overwhelming darkness that swallowed their cries. The flashbacks were so intense that Mariana awoke drenched in sweat, the whispered fragments of their final words mingling with her own ragged breathing. As the days passed, Mariana delved deeper into the case. She visited local libraries and spoke with residents whose ancestors had been touched by the tragedy. An old man, eyes clouded with memories, recalled a night when the sky shimmered with unexplainable lights and a low, persistent hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere. He mentioned that the victims had been unusually fascinated by that strange phenomenon, almost as if drawn to it by an irresistible force. His voice trembled as he described the men's final decision, to wear lead masks not to guard against radiation, but to protect themselves from witnessing something unspeakable. Mariana's investigation soon revealed an even darker possibility. The lead masks, once thought to be a bizarre precaution against environmental hazards, were in fact a desperate measure. The men had feared that the signal, a mysterious transmission or ritualistic beacon, would force them to witness a horror that no mortal mind could endure. The journal entries hinted at an ancient, inhuman presence that lurked just beyond the veil of reality, a malevolent force capable of bending time and perception. It was this entity that the victims had unwittingly enticed, lured by their own existential curiosity and a desire to glimpse the unknown. Late one stormy evening, while Mariana reviewed the evidence in her cluttered study, a sudden power surge plunged her apartment into darkness. The only illumination came from her laptop screen, where static began to distort an old video file she'd recovered from a secondary source, a grainy recording from the night of the tragedy. In the flickering images, she caught sight of a spectral figure standing in the distance, its features obscured by shadow and a shifting, mask-like visage. The recording wasn't just a recounting of the events, it was a live echo of that fateful night, as if the past were bleeding into the present. Overlaid on the footage were brief flashes of cryptic symbols that pulsed in time with the irregular static, as if they were a Morse code of madness. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Mariana began to experience unsettling encounters in her daily life. Reflections in mirrors revealed fleeting shapes behind her, and the soft hum of her recorder sometimes carried whispered warnings in languages long forgotten. The more evidence she uncovered, the more she became convinced that the signal, a force, a ritual, perhaps even a cosmic command, had never ceased. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been altered on that hilltop, and its malevolent echo was now calling to her. In a final, desperate bid for understanding, Mariana returned to the hillside at dawn. The landscape was shrouded in a ghostly mist, and the air vibrated with a low, omnipresent hum. Standing in the center of the stone circle, she felt an overwhelming compulsion to raise her voice, to call out to whatever ancient presence had ensnared the fate of those doomed men. As she spoke into the silent void, the wind seemed to answer, carrying back a cacophony of disembodied voices and the unmistakable heart-stopping cadence of the signal. In that moment, a chilling realization gripped her. The ritual was incomplete. The men's final act had been a failed attempt to ward off an incalculable horror, and now, decades later, the beacon remained active. Mariana's final recording, made on that mist-laden hilltop, captures her trembling voice as she admits a terrifying truth. "I thought I was uncovering a long-forgotten mystery, but I fear I have only awakened something that was meant to be sealed away forever. The signal, it's still calling. And now I can feel it watching me." A sudden gust of wind extinguished her flashlight, plunging her into darkness as the sound of the static swelled to an almost unbearable pitch. In the final seconds of the recording, a shape looms behind her, a hulking, indistinct figure that defies human description, its presence a silent promise of eternal vigilance. Mariana's fate remains unknown. Some say her recording was discovered days later by a local patrol, its contents dismissed as a hysterical delusion. Others whisper that on stormy nights, an eerie broadcast can be heard over abandoned radios, a static-laden signal carrying the echoes of an ancient, inhuman ritual. The lead masks case, once relegated to the annals of unsolved mysteries, has taken on a new, horrifying dimension. The ritual was never truly completed, and the signal, a relentless, cosmic beckoning, continues to pulse through the void, ever hungry for another witness, another soul to bear the unspeakable truth. And somewhere, in the silent depths of a forgotten forest or a decaying apartment in Sao Paulo, the presence watches and waits. Its gaze, shielded by the cursed lead masks of a doomed past, now turns toward the future. The signal is still active, its call a chilling reminder that some horrors are eternal, and that some truths should forever remain hidden. Now, for another dark and haunting tale that will send shivers down your spine. I remember a time when the silence between us was a language of its own, a secret melody that only Jennifer and I could hear. I am June, and this is my story of a bond so deep it felt as though we were one soul split in two, destined to wander a path that no ordinary life could ever understand. I grew up with Jennifer always by my side, our whispers forming a private universe. We invented words that danced on our tongues, a symphony of sounds and silences that bridged the gap between thought and feeling. Our parents called it a curse, our teachers a mystery, but to us, it was the very essence of life. Every glance we exchanged, every synchronized movement, was a quiet affirmation of our unity. In our eyes, the world was divided into what was ours and what lay beyond the reach of our shared understanding. But as the years advanced, the bond that once comforted us began to take on a darker hue. I started noticing things, a movement in the corner of my eye, objects shifting ever so slightly when I wasn't looking, as if an unseen hand was playing tricks on our reality. It wasn't long before the inexplicable became our constant companion. Late at night, when the house was swallowed by darkness, I would catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the reflection of a window or a mirror. It wasn't Jennifer, It was something else, an intruder in our world, lurking on the periphery of our shared existence. The nights grew longer and so did the whispers. Sometimes I'd lie awake listening to the soft sound of Jennifer's breath, even when I was sure she slept on the other side of our bed. I began to suspect that the entity I saw in every reflective surface was watching us, waiting for something or perhaps warning us of what was to come. Our secret language, once playful and full of wonder, began to carry a weight I could not ignore. There were words I dared not speak aloud, for fear they might summon the unspeakable. One autumn evening, as the wind howled outside and the dying light of dusk bled through the window, Jennifer's eyes locked onto mine with a strange intensity. In a voice that trembled with both urgency and sorrow, she whispered, "One of us has to die." Her words reverberated in the quiet room, a decree that shattered the fragile balance we had so carefully maintained. I didn't understand then, was it a prophecy, a desperate plea, or the machination of the dark presence that had begun to weave itself into our lives? The notion festered in my mind, a dark seed that grew with every passing day. Before I could find an answer, everything changed. Jennifer's laughter, once the music of my everyday, was silenced in an instant. One morning, I awoke to find her lying motionless, as if she had simply evaporated from the space we shared. The doctor said it was a sudden illness, a heart attack perhaps, but I have never believed it. In the silence of her absence, the shadows in our home deepened. The reflections in every mirror grew stranger, as if Jennifer's face was caught between worlds, a constant reminder that her death had not brought the closure we so desperately needed. In the weeks that followed, I found remnants of her presence scattered throughout our belongings. A diary with pages that seemed to have been written in a hand not entirely mine, notes in our secret language that I could no longer decipher, and photographs in which the background revealed fleeting, ghostly silhouettes that shouldn't have been there. At times, I would catch my own reflection shifting in the glass, a smile not entirely my own, eyes that seemed to plead for release. I felt as though I was being haunted not only by the memory of my sister, but by something that was using her absence to infiltrate my very being. Nights became a labyrinth of terror. I would lie in bed, the darkness alive with the sound of soft, almost imperceptible whispers. Sometimes I swore I could see Jennifer's silhouette in the doorway, her eyes filled with an expression of both love and despair, silently begging me to understand what we had unleashed. Other times, the shadow that haunted every reflective surface stretched longer and darker, a silent observer that I could neither confront nor escape. In those moments, I was overwhelmed by a sensation of being trapped between two realities, the living world and a spectral realm where our bond had been warped by forces beyond our comprehension. The line between memory and madness blurred as I began to question if Jennifer had ever truly left me. Each morning, I discovered new writings in my old notebooks, cryptic messages scrawled in trembling script that I could not recall authoring. They read like warnings or perhaps a confession of sins committed in the name of our inseparable unity. "She is not gone," one passage insisted, while another declared, "The mirror hides the truth." I started to fear that my mind was betraying me, that the ghost of my sister was manifesting through my thoughts, her presence seeping into every crevice of my life. In the solitude of our once shared room, I took to gazing into the mirror for hours on end, desperate to catch a sign, to understand whether the face that looked back was entirely mine. There were moments when the reflection wavered, when the contours of Jennifer's face appeared in the shadows behind me, or when my own features blurred into something unrecognizable. It was as if the mirror itself was a threshold, a gateway between what had been and what was yet to come. Late one night, as a storm raged outside and the wind battered the walls of our old house, I felt an irresistible pull toward the attic, the one place we had always locked away, filled with relics of our shared childhood. I found an old trunk with a faded lock, and inside lay the scattered pieces of our secret world. Diaries, sketches, and letters written in that code language we had invented, imbued with both wonder and a hint of dread. As I leafed through the pages, I came across a final, unfinished note from Jennifer. In her distinctive scrawl, it read, "I tried to shield you to keep us both safe, but the darkness demanded a sacrifice. I was the chosen one, or was I merely a vessel?" The words echoed in the hollow space of the attic, mingling with the sound of raindrops and the low hum of an unseen force. In that moment, I began to comprehend the chilling possibility. The bond we shared was not simply a quirk of fate or the product of isolation. It was a pact, forged in the depths of our intertwined souls, with a price that had to be paid. Perhaps the whisper in Jennifer's ear that fateful night was not merely an expression of sibling rivalry or a tragic inevitability, but a summoning by something ancient and unspeakable. And now, with Jennifer's physical form gone, that force had turned its attention to me, determined to complete the ritual we had unwittingly begun. I now live in a constant state of alertness, forever haunted by the specter of my twin and the presence that slipped through the mirror. At times, I feel her warmth beside me as if she has never truly left, yet I also sense a cold, indifferent force lurking just beyond the veil of perception. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light, sends a shiver down my spine, a reminder that fate is still at work. Was Jennifer's death natural, a cruel twist of fate that ended our unholy symbiosis, or did something claim her, an entity that now seeks to fill the void in our bond? Each night, I record my thoughts, hoping that one day the truth will be understood. But in the silence of my solitary vigil, I wonder if the words scrawled in my notebooks are messages from Jennifer herself, or if they are the malignant whispers of the force that has taken residence within me. In every reflective surface I search for a sign, a fleeting glimpse of another face, a shadow that doesn't belong. And though I long for the comfort of our once unbreakable connection, I cannot shake the terror that I am being watched, that the unfinished ritual is still active, patiently awaiting its next command. The unanswered question torments me: is Jennifer's spirit at peace, or has it been claimed by something darker, a presence that now hovers at the edge of my vision, ready to step out from the shadows? As I write these words, the mirror in my room ripples like disturbed water, and for a brief, horrifying instant, I see not my own reflection but that of a smiling, familiar face. My heart pounds, and I know with bone-deep certainty that the curse, the pact, and the unspeakable bond we shared are far from over. And so, I remain here in the silence, forever haunted by the knowledge that one half of me is lost, or perhaps waiting to be reclaimed. In the dim glow of the midnight hour, I whisper into the darkness, "Jennifer, are you here?" Only the shadows answer, a quiet, dissonant chorus that promises that the ritual was never truly completed. The presence lingers, an eternal reminder that fate is inexorable, and sometimes the past refuses to die. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling stories. And hit the bell icon to never miss an update.